My husband forbade me from going into the attic. I wish I had listened. Reddit history. I didn't have any reason to think there was something being hidden from me in the attic until my husband had his accident. I had said to him that we might have crutches tucked away somewhere in the attic because my grandfather had used them before he passed and I couldn't remember giving them away. No, my husband said from where he was sat upright in pain in the hospital bed. It wasn't being told no that was the problem. It was how my husband said it. He's always been a soft touch, always pleasant to be around, and more often than not I'm used to getting my way. But not this time. Never had I heard my husband talk to me with such barely concealed panic. You have to swear to me you'll not go into the attic, he said, it's not safe. Now the thing is I decided not to question my husband on this in the moment. I was too shocked by the way he was talking to me and I could just tell by his tone trying to argue or question him about it wasn't going to get me anywhere. Besides, for a long time, I've considered him to be the love of my life, someone who I trusted more than anyone else. I promise I won't, I said to him. At the time I meant it. I really did. But once I was home alone laying in bed staring off into the dark I just couldn't bear not to find out what it was he didn't want me to find in the attic. I lost my internal battle not to go looking into the attic bit by bit. First I got myself out of bed to use the toilet, then I told myself I wouldn't be able to go back to sleep without drinking a cup of tea. By the time the kettle finished boiling I had already lost my internal battle to listen to my husband and had gone into the hallway and yanked down the steps from the ceiling. I started to climb the steps, I was in my PJs with my fluffy slippers, and I pushed open the attic door. A musty smell of old and slightly damp wood greeted me as I climbed all the way up inside. I groped for the light cord which I knew was somewhere nearby and after a few moments managed to find it. The bare light bulb in the middle of the attic came on, illuminating the numerous things we had put away over the last few years. It had never occurred to me until that evening how insistent my husband had been that he be the one to go up into the attic and not me. I had always taken it as him doing the manly role of making sure the heavy items were lugged up and down the attic steps. It wasn't like I wanted to argue to do those things myself. At best I had only ever seen my husband standing on the top ladder step whilst I handed him things, or asked for certain items, like our plastic Christmas tree and the other Christmas ornaments, to be brought down. The first thing I felt upon seeing the attic lit was relief. There wasn't a dead body hidden away as far as I could tell. Then I felt a touch of joy at spotting the crutches in the corner. I felt conflicted because now I knew they were there, but I also knew I wouldn't be able to tell my husband since he had forbade me from going into the attic in the first place. Maybe he had warned me against going into the attic simply because he didn't want to risk me hurting myself by falling down the ladder, or something like that. I groped for the cord, already deciding that must have been what my husband was concerned about when I spotted an item I hadn't seen before. It was a tall wooden cabinet. The wood it was made of was that cheap IKEA type, certainly note something expensive. Despite this I just felt like something was off about the cabinet. I ventured across the attic being careful not to trip up on all the junk by my feet. I managed to make it over to the cabinet without knocking anything over or injuring myself. I was starting to feel the chill and wanted to get out of the attic as soon as possible, so my only goal was to take a quick look inside the cabinet just to know there was nothing of importance in there. I noticed my fingers were a little numb from the cold of the attic as I reached for the little round cabinet handle and opened it. Something red and round sprung out at me and I let out a scream, throwing an arm up and striking the thing before it could hurt me. After a moment my panic subsided and I had to laugh. It was a balloon. A simple red balloon with a length of string attached to it. At the end of the string was a small plastic weight to prevent the balloon from floating away. I took a few moments to inspect the balloon. It had my name written on it in capitals, B-E-T-H. For a moment I felt sort of touched as if the balloon were part of some surprise which had been set for me. But that didn't make sense because my birthday was 2 weeks prior to me going up into the attic and there hadn't been any red balloon with my name written on it with a black Sharpie pen. I checked the rest of the cabinet only to find there was nothing else in there. I decided then that the whole idea of me being worried in the first place had been silly and that, as usual, I should have put my trust in my husband. I considered putting the balloon back into the cabinet but it was getting colder in the attic and I just wanted to get back to bed, so I headed back down, closing the attic door shut behind me then setting the ladder steps up again. I went to bed and forgot about the cabinet and the red balloon with my name on it. The following morning I went back to the hospital to visit my husband. I could tell there was something off about him the moment I entered the ward he was in. He was sat upright in bed, his right leg covered in a cast. He had been in the midst of getting out of his car when another driver who had lost control of their vehicle rammed into him, pinning him, and his right leg in particular against an adjacent vehicle. His leg had been broken but would ultimately be fine once given time to heal with the cast on. We talked about different things, nothing of any importance, but the whole time I could tell my husband wanted to ask me if I had gone into the attic. He was dead serious but trying not to be, watching me with a strange kind of suspicion. I'd had enough. Oh what? I said, rolling my eyes and sighing exasperatedly. I went into the attic and there's nothing up there. Seriously, what's the big deal? You what? He said, his eyes widening and his face reddening. He wasn't just angry, he was panicking. He was afraid. I started to doubt myself. Dean. I said, please, you're scaring me. It's okay, he said. What did you do whilst you were up there? I stuttered, feeling the urge to cry. I found those crutches I mentioned before. Is that it? He said. Did you do anything whilst you were up there? I considered lying, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Besides, I had seen what was in the cabinet, so the worst that could happen was Dean would be a little bit mad at me for not listening to him. Or so I thought. I found a cabinet, I said. Dean flinched as if I were stabbing a knife between his ribs and into his heart. Please tell me you didn't open it, he said. I opened it, I said, trying to sound angry as if that might somehow make Dean rethink how he was talking to me and behaving. There's just a red balloon in there with my name on it. I seriously don't. What did you do with it? Dean shouted. He grabbed me and yelled at me again. What did you do with it? This was so sudden from Dean I didn't know whether to laugh, scream, or break into tears. If it wasn't that I was so confused about what I might have even done wrong, I might have done any one of those things. Instead I just froze, staring back into his panic-stricken face. Nothing. I said in a pitiful voice, you're hurting me. He pried his hands off me and stared into his lap. Did you put it back? He said, lifting his gaze back to me, asking urgently. And no, I said, I just left it out. Dean cursed so loud I screamed and shied away from him. Beth, listen to me, he said, you have to go back to the house right now, go back to the attic, and put the balloon carefully back into the cabinet. Do you understand? Why? I said, please, this doesn't make any sense. I know, he said, please Beth, you have to trust me. It's extremely important that you go home right now and do as I've asked. Go now. I'll explain everything later. Please, Beth, please. He wasn't demanding this of me like he had done before. It was like he was pleading for his life. I felt sick, and still so helplessly confused. What the heck was so important about a stupid red balloon? Okay, fine, I said, but you better explain this crap when I get back. I will, said Dean, just go do it, please. I walked briskly out of the ward and exited the hospital and got back in my car. I replayed everything that had been said between Dean and I at the hospital, and with every passing moment I found myself wondering why I was doing what he asked. Was he losing his mind? Was I? I just didn't understand what was so important about putting the balloon back into the cabinet. The only question that stuck in my mind on the 10-minute drive home was how the balloon had been so full of air when I had found it. Had Dean recently bought the balloon and put it into the cabinet? Or was he somehow making sure the balloon was being continually filled with helium or something like it to make sure it always remained afloat? But then why would he do any of those things in the first place? What was the significance of any of it? My initial fear and concern I felt for Dean was only tempered by the fact that I was on a mission. I reached the front door, entered inside our home, walked up the stairs to the upstairs hallway. I reached up, doing a little jump to grip the pull-down ladder, then pulled it all the way down. Finally I started to climb the ladder, and after pushing open the attic door I made my way inside. I spotted the red balloon with my name on it floating up against the attic ceiling. Looking at it I tried to figure out what it was that was so important about it, but it was just a balloon. It felt underwhelming to take hold of the string and to guide the balloon back to the cabinet. I was about to put the balloon back inside before I stopped myself. Since I had it right in front of me, I decided I would look it over one more time just to make sure there was nothing obviously strange about it. The thing is, I have long, manicured nails. Always have. I love them that way, and Dean does too. Without meaning to, I gripped the balloon a little too hard whilst looking it over, and it popped. I gave a little scream as the string, now no longer being held up by the balloon, hung like a limp flower in my grip. For a horrible moment I wondered if there was something to the gas inside the balloon which was poisonous, but the air I was breathing seemed fine. In fact, nothing seemed amiss. The balloon had popped, and that was it. No big deal. The world hadn't ended. No demon had been freed from the confines of the balloon. If anything had been let loose from the balloon now it had burst, was a renewed sense of annoyance at Dean for making me worry about what was in the attic. I put the string and the pieces of the balloon into the cabinet and closed the cabinet after. And after I did this, a horrible notion occurred to me. What if, by some strange unknowable reason, Dean's life force was connected to the balloon? This was by far the strangest idea that had ever came into my mind, but somehow it made an odd kind of sense. I had never seen anything supernatural in my life, and had no reason to believe in such things, but even so, the notion that the balloon by its existence was keeping something at bay, like preventing my husband's death somehow, stuck in my mind. I called him, only to notice several failed calls from him because my phone had been on silent. "Beth," he said. There was something off about his voice, but I couldn't tell what it was. It wasn't that he was panicked, more panicked than I had ever heard him in my life. It wasn't that he sounded particularly different, but there was something off that I just couldn't place. "I'm here," I said. "Did you put it back?" he said. "Yes," I lied, "it's back in the cabinet." I could hear the relieved sigh from him on the other end of the phone. "Okay," he said, "just get out of there." "Dean, what the heck is going on?" I said. What Dean told me next was a blatant lie. I could tell right away, and I think he knew how obvious the lie was even as he told it. "I made a bet with Pete that I could keep a balloon from popping for a whole year," said Dean. "He said he'll pay me $5,000 if I can manage it." This sounded like something Dean and Pete would do, but it was so clearly a lie. "Oh, okay," I said, "that's so silly, you had me worried." "Why yeah," said Dean, "sorry, it's so stupid, I know, but I didn't want to lose the bet." After a brief back and forth asking me if I was okay and me telling him I was fine, I hung up the phone. I headed back down from the attic and closed it all up behind me. After I popped the balloon, something massive had changed. But it wasn't something I could put into words right away. It was something nearly indescribable at first. Ever since I popped the balloon by accident, a feeling of having lost something had stuck with me. It was a feeling I had known before, back when my parents had died a decade before in a freak accident. A nasty, hollowed-out kind of feeling. I tried to keep myself busy around the house for the remainder of the day, but I found the feeling of loss was getting worse, not better. Bit by bit I noticed I was pretending to be okay when I really wasn't. I tried watching one of my favorite reality TV shows and found I couldn't concentrate on what was happening on the show at all. I was lost in my own thoughts, questioning the worsening sense of dread taking hold of me with every passing moment. It was as if someone had put a bear trap around my heart and was squeezing it tight to make sure each sharp edge were puncturing deeper, carving up the muscle and drawing ever more blood from the tender flesh, trying to beat despite the fatal wounds inflicted on it. I slipped off the couch and found myself gasping for air. I could hardly breathe, and I was panicking so bad I was sure I was going to have a heart attack. The living room and the entire world around me seemed to fade into an obscure mist as I struggled to keep air moving in and out of my lungs. A guttural kind of whine choked out of my throat as if I had forgotten how to breathe entirely. Strange spots like static from an old TV showered around my field of vision before everything went dark. When I woke, the daylight outside had been replaced by a black veil, and I could hear my mobile phone buzzing on the carpet. Drool had pooled from my mouth onto the carpet, and I could feel dampness around my crotch from where I must have wet myself during my panic before. I breathed in a hard lungful of air, my eyes frantically searching around me. After a few minutes I managed to have the sense of self to sit upright, the living room swaying some as I situated my back against the sofa. I spotted my phone. There were 30 missed calls from Dean. Just reading his name on the screen elicited a fresh wave of panic in me, and I found myself retching until a string of bile dribbled from my mouth onto the carpet. Each time I looked at Dean's name on the phone, a fresh bout of retching took hold of me. What was wrong with me? What was happening? Please, I thought, please, whatever is causing this, make it stop. My phone vibrated again from a new call from Dean. I wanted to answer it, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I would rather die than hear his voice, I thought with nightmarish certainty. In my mad frustration, I threw my phone across the room. It cracked loudly against the living room door. The phone stopped vibrating altogether. Stark quiet reality lingered in the living room. How had my life taken such a drastic turn? With all the lights off, with just the soft white glow of streetlights pouring in from the window, I felt as if I were a child that had woken in the middle of the night to find the familiar surroundings of their home turned strange and uninviting. Never more had I wished my parents were still alive. A part of me wished desperately to be a child again, to slip back into my parents' bed, feeling their large, firm and warm bodies on either side of me, keeping me safe from all dark and unfamiliar things in the world. I couldn't bring myself to move. Minutes or even an hour might have passed by the time the sound of a vehicle easing to a stop outside the house drew my attention. Numbly, I listened to the sound of someone getting out of the car, the door of the car being slammed shut hard enough to force me out of my stupor. I got up, trying to ignore the nasty wetness of my PJ bottoms, and the pungent stench, and looked beyond the living room window to see a white figure, like a ghost, staggering towards the front door. No, please no, I thought. I can't see him. Not now. The sound of keys scratching around the keyhole was followed by the door bolt unlocking with a hard clack. I could hear the front door swinging open and then smacking the wall. Faintly I heard the sound of the car which had brought Dean to the house drive off. Beth? Beth? A hysteric voice cried out, the voice echoing throughout the house. It was Dean. He was yelling like a madman. I found myself trembling, unable to do anything but stare with wide, frantic eyes to the living room doorway. I heard the thuds of Dean's cast thumping on the hallway floorboards before he came staggering into view. He almost fell to the ground and had to hold onto the doorway frame to keep himself from falling over. He was still dressed in the hospital gown. I had heard him drop the car keys and I saw his phone was in his left hand. He was sweating, breathing heavy. His eyes were what scared me in a way I had never experienced before. His eyes were opened so wide and were fixed on me with such intensity one shut my eyes and buried my face in my hands like a child. I wanted to cry, I wanted to scream, but I was so afraid of Dean, or whoever that person was standing staring at me like some demon, that I simply couldn't do anything but pray for him to leave. I can explain everything, Dean said. No, no, I whined hysterically, trembling, not daring to open my eyes or move my hands away from my face. The living room shook with each thump of Dean's cast-covered foot landing on the carpeted floor. Each step grew louder, closer, until I felt Dean's hand touch my upper back. When I tell you I have never felt something so dreadful in all my life, I am not exaggerating one bit. I would rather death itself touch me than feel Dean's touch on any part of me ever again. My skin didn't crawl, it didn't convulse, it rejected Dean's touch so violently the scream which erupted from my mouth was something bordering on demonic. Dean's hand pulled back. The absence of it was bliss. But he was still in the room. Just knowing that was driving me to madness. Get out, get out, get out, I screamed at the top of my lungs, my throat quickly becoming raw. I couldn't stop myself from shrieking at him, nor did I want to. Beth, please. Dean shouted over my screams. He had to leave. He had to. I had heard once that suicide was like being in a burning building. That it seemed easier to jump out of the burning building, choosing one kind of death over the agony of being burned alive, that the pain of living seemed worse than the short pains which came before death. I understood this analogy perfectly in this moment. The pain, the sheer awful reality of knowing that man existed right there in front of me was worse than the threat of burning alive. The solution to my problem came to me in an instant. If I could have, I would have clawed my own throat out with my nails, but I knew they wouldn't be sharp enough to do what needed to be done. I shot up and screamed in terror as I ran around him, shying away from him. My ears burned at the sound of his pleading for me to come back. Every millisecond of the sound of his voice fading away was like a terrible weight being lifted from my aching back, as if the very sound of his voice were somehow making my bones brittle and weak. I reached the kitchen and found the cutlery drawer and retrieved what I came for, a sharp knife. The agonizing sound of him entering the kitchen followed. I closed my eyes and put the knife to my throat, feeling the tip of it drawing blood. "What are you doing?" he cried. "Leave or I'll do it," I screeched. In my madness I chanced opening my eyes just a little to look at him. The shadowy white glow of him obscured by my eyelashes was enough to make me want to keel over and vomit. I dug the knife deeper into my neck. Death was better than one more second of knowing he was there. Several thumps followed in rapid succession. I felt the warmth of my blood spilling down my neck. It wasn't something I wanted. I've always hated the sight of blood. I'm used to crying when I get splinters. But it didn't matter because the whole world might as well be burning if it meant he was somewhere in it. There was silence. I opened my eyes. He was gone. The front door wide open, framing the street outside. I stood watching the doorway with the knife at my neck for several minutes, my hand trembling, before I let myself slink down onto the tiled kitchen floor. It's been 2 hours and he hasn't returned. I have the knife ready if he does. I don't know what to do. Help. Thanks for watching. See you later in new Reddit videos.